Now you're like, okay, Tamika, you already told me all about these SOPs, but what should I put in it? That's normally, I can't even say that could be, that's normally your longest part of your SOP is your procedure. Pull out certificates, they be feeling like, hey honey, I know my job because I got this and this certificate. It can be something you made up in Word. They like a good old certificate. Ain't no reason why you can't create a video yourself. When they see you in a training, they see you playing it out, guess what? They're gonna like it a little bit better. Hey y'all, this is Tamika, the face behind Hey HR. Y'all, I am here with another video in our Entrepreneur and Small Business Owner series, and this one is going to tell you all about the HR docs that you should have on hand. And these are just your basic documents. I tried to keep it light for you guys and not get too detailed into it, but this is a good foundation so that you guys can start building your HR documentation, building your consistency amongst your organization, building your best practices. And so if you guys want to know what docs you need as a small business owner and an entrepreneur, then definitely keep watching. So maybe you've heard of this and maybe you haven't, but if you have not, get ready. If you have, I'm sure I got some new information for you. But you're going to need to start creating your standard operating procedures, better known as the SOPs. So these operating procedures can be used in a myriad of ways, but I'm going to first tell you the definition of standard operating procedures. And so to make sure that I don't miss words or not give you guys all of the details, y'all know I have my notes. So the definition, or a common definition of the standard operating procedures, and I'm just going to call them SOPs throughout this video, is that they are individual documents. So your SOPs aren't just one SOP and now I'm all done. There are a number of SOPs depending on procedures. So it's a document that provides clear-cut directions and instructions on how teams and the members within an organization must go about completing certain processes. Or you can also say that it's a document that provides explicit directions for completing a certain task. You guys notice I just said a certain task. So you have a number of standard operating procedures. If you are someone that needs a virtual assistant, and maybe that virtual assistant responds to emails, you're going to have a standard operating procedure on how they respond to an email. So maybe you have different type of emails that you need responses for. So maybe you have client call emails like I do. Maybe you have resume review emails like I do. Or maybe you have emails where someone has just left a comment on a video like I do. And what you would do is have a standard operating procedure for each of those if the process is different. And because your responses should be different, your processes could be different. If you have different people that handle those emails, then you'll need a new standard operating procedure because the same person isn't handling this. Now, if you want, you can clump it all into one and say, well, these 2-3 people can respond to these 3 emails this way. But over time, you want to make sure that it's a little bit more refined. So you can start by kind of gathering them together to start your SOPs and to try to keep things consistent. I highly suggest that whenever you're starting with SOPs that you test out those SOPs yourself and make sure that the process is going as it should before you make it a formal documentation. I also suggest that you always make sure that you're prepared to do a few edits to this until you perfect your system or until you perfect this SOP. Don't feel bad when you start an SOP and you have to do edits. I honestly would start them, test them out, and I would test them a few times before I made them an actual official document where I'm either training with it or informing my team with it or literally using it as a document throughout my training process or what have you. So there's several different important things on why SOPs are good for your organization. And one reason that it's good is that it allows organizations to systemize their process and to keep all team members or stakeholders on the same page. So it's important that someone's not telling you like, oh no, I do it this way. And then someone else is like, but I do it this way. Well, so-and-so told me to do it this way. With this SOP, you can always say, what does the SOP say? And you can use it to make sure everyone's doing it exactly the same. And so obviously that makes sure that you're having your processes efficient, that you're having a standard way to collect data to make sure that you're getting the right results. It just helps with consistency in keeping things all in order. and keeping things uniform. And so it obviously helps with best practices. And then it can save on insurance costs or litigations. There's been times where I've worked with multiple organizations where they've been audited, and when they get audited, they'll say, well, how do you normally handle this? It's always been great that we can just pull a SOP and show them this is how all of our employees do it. This is how they're all trained on it. It could also help with litigation, because a lot of times your insurance company can say, well, how do you train your employees to drive your vehicles? Because this takes your mod or your insurance rates down whenever you're doing workers' comp or auto insurance for like your vehicles that you're lending out, or even your vehicle that you're using for business purposes. So SOPs they're just great in so many different ways, and I highly suggest that you create them for different things. Now, another thing that SOPs does is that it ensures that you're doing good onboarding and good training. Most people, instead of creating a separate training document, they will use their SOP as their training document. And they will use that as a reference for training. So it's always really good for that as well. Now you're like, okay, Tamika, you already told me all about these SOPs, but what should I put in it? Some of the list, I will say, of things that are included in standard operating procedures, and this is pretty much with any type of organization, any size of organization, any industry, is that you want to have like an overview page or a title page. Some people do a title page per SOP. I don't think that's necessary, but I think doing an overview of it is great. Some people put it as just like a chart in the top that gives a full overview of the SOP. Some people do a whole page. It totally is up to you on what you prefer. And then you also want to include the purpose of this SOP, because you want to make it clear why someone's training, like why do I need to know this, or when would I use these steps in this process. And so you also want to include the roles and responsibilities of each person involved. You don't want to put names or particular identifiers. You may want to put the job title. So you definitely want to identify what role does this person play in this SOP and what are they responsible for. So all of this you could include right into your title page as well, or your overview page. You also want to include resources that they will use. What are some of the things that they need to add within each step to help them get to completion? You want to include materials as well. So maybe they need to also make sure to use this particular software or what have you. You want to include that too. And then you want to also make sure that you're including any cautions or warnings or hazards that may come from doing this process. Because that's telling an employee like, hey, you gotta be safe. I need you to wear a hard hat. I need you to wear glasses. I need you to always make sure that you have closed-toe shoes. You want to include that in your SOP. You want to include your methodology and your procedures. So this is the biggest chunk of your SOP, because it could get pretty lengthy and it could lead into several pages when you're going through each different procedure, because in each procedure you're literally writing who's the person that's responsible for this task, and you're putting it in order as it should go. So that could be that's normally, I can't even say that could be, that's normally your longest part of your SOP is your procedure. And then you also want to do some quality control. And so how you'll do that is you want to make sure that everyone is doing this process with the same exact form. So I always suggest dating these SOPs or giving them numbers, like form numbers, so that you can know with each revision, and you can call it like 2022 SOP 123.4. So if everyone knows when it gets to that point, oh, okay, this is the fourth revision of this SOP. However you want to do it, you want to make sure that you are keeping track of these changes. So I always suggest the changes as well, because someone could come in and say, hey, we haven't updated this SOP since 2010. Now we're in 2022. There's so much that's changed. And so that's always great to have that in there too. But you want to make sure that you're keeping not just a control of it in that way, but that you're keeping them all in like a particular software, a particular file. And you only want to have them in one place. I don't suggest that people like print them out because they can get outdated. But if you want to print them out, that's fine. And if you want to keep them all in one binder, then that's even better, where everyone has to go to the same binder for it. You want to do some controls to make sure that people are following the right revision of that SOP. And so you also want to include references. Where can this person find additional resources to help them with this procedure? You want to include a glossary of telling them what each term means. Maybe they're very, very new to this and you're using some terms that aren't common, or you're using some acronyms that aren't common. And so you want to have a glossary in it as well. And then I always suggest having necessary sign-offs. If you have a department head of this procedure, then make sure that they're signing, make sure that the CEO is signing, whoever needs to make sure that they know each revision of this or has created this or is responsible for it overall should be signing off on these in some way. If that's an electronic signature or if they're literally signing on that document. Because the great thing about that is when you have them signed, then they know that there's a new revision. And so they're looking for those changes and they're implementing and making sure that everyone keeps the same best practices by keeping those same procedures or steps or what have you. Another thing is also a quality control check where that person is making sure that you literally included everything, or that you didn't forget that a job title changed, or that you didn't forget that a name of a tool that you use has changed. It's always good to have those sign-offs and make sure that they put the date on it too, and make sure that they all are aware that everyone has signed off on it. So now that we have SOPs out of the way, we're going to talk about a new HR document that you should always keep. And not necessarily a document, it's going to be several documents. And when you're a small organization, typically your HR department or whoever is owning this organization handles this. This isn't something that a department handles. Normally when you get to a bigger organization, you have 50, 100, 500 employees, then you normally have a training department that handles this. But as a small business owner and entrepreneur, then you want to have one person that handles your training documents. And so I highly suggest that you have a training file for all of your employees. Don't include it into their regular employee file, because you want to make sure that whenever you need to reference it, or a manager needs to reference it, or a manager that's not their manager needs to reference it, it's something that you can share and their person's personal information isn't in it. So I highly suggest making a training file for each of your employees, or a training binder that has each person's name in it and that you're putting in their training documents as they complete them. So as they complete an SOP and they've trained on that, they can sign off on that SOP, you put it into their training file. If they do something with the certification or where they get a certification at the end, you can put that into their training file. So it's always great to keep a training file for each employee. Now, the biggest thing I don't think people realize is that you need to make training a part of your culture. People hate the term training, especially after they've been with the organization for a while. They feel like they're experienced. They feel like they're an expert. They want to know, why do I need a training all over again? So I highly suggest always trying to make it a part of your culture. Make it where all of your employees, including you, the owner, the CEO, the creator, the operator, whatever, you do the training too. This makes everyone understand that we're all consistently learning. We have a culture of learning. We have a culture of making sure that we're all where we should be within our task. And so super duper important to make your training a part of your culture. So a great way to make it a part of your culture is to create a training schedule. Make sure that you know that employees are aware of it from the day they walk in.
Hey, this is our training schedule and these are the days that these trainings have to be completed.
Try to do it as a group exercise so that no one feels like they're just sitting and training all by themselves. Try to do giveaways. As you complete a training, this is what you give. Even if it's company garb where you have your company name all over it, or a lunch card or a gift card or what have you, make sure that you give something back, because you want them to know, I appreciate you training, because they're bettering your organization. Another thing that I would highly suggest is by giving certificates as people complete different things. People love certificates. They be feeling like, hey honey, I know my job because I got this and this certificate. It can be something you made up in Word. They like a good old certificate. So do certificates, and that's also something you can put into their training file. Acknowledge them at different times. So if you're doing a company-wide email, I would say on a quarterly basis, say, hey, these are all of our people who successfully completed XYZ training. Thank you so much for doing this, or whatever. Include those people who've completed those trainings to help other people while they're being trained. Again, you want to make sure that training is a part of your culture. And so a great way of doing that is just being inclusive by any means necessary. And when you talk about training, make sure you talk about it with a smile. If you sound like you don't like training and training getting on your nerve, that's going to be in your culture. So I know there are plenty of times I don't feel like doing a training. I still try to make it seem like it's fun. Matter of fact, it gets easier because you're doing the same damn training over and over again. So another way to make it fun is just by changing the format. Don't always show that same video or that same link to that same YouTube channel. Find a different video link. Do it in a software. Get someone that already has a training in some other format to do it. You know, instead of just using that same PowerPoint drive, then, you know, say, okay, we're going to create a video ourselves. Guys, I create videos myself. Ain't no reason why you can't create a video yourself. When they see you in a training, they see you playing it out, guess what? They're gonna like it a little bit better. You can always find someone to edit that video for you, and that could be your training video. You can perhaps use that for a couple years before you recreate it. But try to look at ways of changing that training, because folks get a little aggravated with the same training over and over again. So I don't think we realize that this could be an issue. But you want to revise and review that training often. I would say initially in the training, you're doing a lot of revisions in the beginning. Don't always make everybody sign off on that training or do that training all over again. Let folks try it a few times and make edits for a while. I would say like 3 to 6 months if you can, before you revise that entire training and make everyone sign off on that training or do that training all over again. But be prepared to revise it. It's just things are going to change. Sometimes you'll miss details. The best time to kind of realize when those changes need to be in place is when someone's actually doing it, and they'll be
like, hey, Tamika, I noticed that you didn't put such and such in here, but I was doing such and such.
Make note of those revisions and be prepared to make changes. Don't feel bad if it needs to be changed. It's natural that you just may not include something. And sometimes some people learn differently, and so they may ask you for things that you just didn't think was necessary. It's okay. You're training everyone, and you should be creating these trainings for the 8-year-old person or person that's in elementary school to understand, because that's typically how like newspapers are written or newspaper articles. They write it so that it's super simple to understand. If you kind of made it a little bit difficult, don't feel bad if you need to kind of revise it and dummy it down a bit. And just don't forget to include your standard trainings. There's some trainings that can truly help you in litigation. There's some trainings that can truly just make sure that you're keeping a safe or an inclusive environment. And some of those trainings are like sexual harassment, diversity, inclusion, your cybersecurity, your contingency plan. And so your cybersecurity may be making sure that folks are looking at email addresses before they respond to them or give out your company-wide information, not clicking on links to make sure that you don't get spammed or that you get hacked. Some of your contingency information is like, I'm in South Carolina and we have hurricanes often, and a lot of roads would flood or bridges are closed. And so maybe you want to make sure that folks know what to do when they have to work from home for an emergency basis. Guys, at worst, COVID should teach us all that we need a contingency plan. And so you want to train everyone on those areas as well. And you can make that your basis training, where everyone gets those same trainings within their first 30 days or 2 weeks of working on a job. And then you can give like SOPs that goes particularly to their jobs. Definitely look at making a schedule of that. I would say on an annual basis, and making sure that everyone takes a part of it, including yourself. So now we get to the very last employee doc that I think is a great foundation for your HR docs, and that is going to be your employee handbook. Guys, it's so important to have an employee handbook. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be detailed, but it does a lot of literally what your SOP does.
But the biggest thing that your employee handbook does is that it provides objectives and leadership styles and management best practices to foster healthy management employee relationships. A lot of things that we don't realize we should include in our employee handbooks is legal verbiage or legal disclaimers. A lot of times there's just, each state kind of requires different disclaimers, and so you want to include those, and sometimes they include the exact way that you have to put it, what page you need to put it on. So definitely see an employment law attorney whenever you're creating your employee handbooks, because that's super duper helpful. So overall, you're going to put company policies in your employee handbook. They don't have to be super detailed. I would leave all benefit information out, because that can change often as well. And so don't put your benefit specifics. You can just say overall what you offer, but there's certain things with benefits that change each year as you renew benefits, so you want to stay away from those. If this is your first time watching a video, then welcome. If this is not and you're returning, then I appreciate you returning. I just cannot wait to see you on the next video.